right. So first of all, Professor Mario, um, I said this to you before that the reason my college is sending me here, I teach at a Hispanic serving institution. Eyeballing it, I don't know, they don't say it's that high, but I think my classes are about 90% Hispanic. And we are technically a Hispanic serving institution. I mean, there are grants for us, just like there are grants for Native Americans or black institutions and things like that. So I asked the question of our president, who is from South America, like generally speaking, how are we serving our Hispanic, population, largely Hispanic? And I started to ask my students, did they know anything about the Bath riots, or did they know about the lynching of Mexicans in the 1920s, the Salt Wars? I can't even imagine today. I said, can you imagine a program called Operation Wetback today, right? And I said, you guys need to know that history. And what I found immediately is I said, some of this stuff is going to be unsavory. I mean, it's not something that's pleasant, but do you want to know it? And they were, we need to know this.
Right.
So where this all kind of began, and I did film inside the Alamo with Bruce Winders, and he gave a wonderful presentation. And then what started to happen, colleagues and stuff, Raul Ramos was probably the person that kicked it off for me as far as reading this, where there was a little bit of a shock. And I'm only summarizing here, but the question that Raul was talking about was, as we were looking at, you can even where I live in California, Robert E. Lee High School is gone. The Confederate statutes are gone in this largely. And what he was asking, why is the Alamo seems to be immune? Why isn't this coming down? And the argument, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have anything in front of me, but he was basically saying, it's not that I want the Alamo pulled down. What I want people to do is a very thorough, comprehensive history and stop following the mythology. And as I was explaining, my students right now are writing their papers that are due in 3 weeks. And what they're doing is looking at what is the mythology? And we were talking, laughing, because they said, hey, Dr. Haas, we're happy to debunk the Alamo if we only knew what the mythology was. And I remember saying, oh my God, do I feel old? You don't know what the mythology of the Alamo is.
Yeah.
So first of all, they're studying that. And then they start to have the articles like Raul and Richard R. Flores about the mythology, and now your work on this, so that they can look. And I told them, I said this right before I left, I'm not looking for disciples. I don't want you to follow me. I have my opinions on this. I want you to be critical thinkers, and here's the the material. And what I found earlier, which is interesting, it seems very we live in a very polarized world. And I was making the example of Northern Ireland because I film a lot of peace builders.
Oh.
And one of the things that stays with me is that what people will do, they go to a dance and they don't know if the other person's Catholic or Protestant. So the easiest way is, where did you go to high school? What bakery do you like? What church do you go to? And the reason I say that is they're filling each other out. They're trying to say, oh my God, this won't work. And I do the same thing with politics now. I'll throw out something like that to see what the response is, and said, forget it. And what I found is that for somebody, sometimes you can get really wonderful examples of the military battles and all that stuff that happened at the Alamo, and yet there's not this, let's examine this. Is it about white supremacy? Is it about settler colonialism? Was it a hopscotch from the Alamo to the Mexican-American War to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, kind of going forward? And I'm being clear here. As I said, I was listening in the car, and I thought, oh my God, this guy he's absolutely on fire. I said, I get to San Antonio, I got to call him up because you weren't on the schedule. I think I sent you a couple of emails.
Yes.
Yeah. So I tried to reach out to you, and I said, well, we'll just call this number and see if he picks up the phone. So I guess what I'd like to ask in general terms with your book on the Alamo, can you give us a bit of a summary what the book, what's the intention of the book, what's the purpose of the book?
Well, I think the title kind of says it. Well, it doesn't say it all, but it says a good chunk of it. The Alamo, a cradle of lies, slavery, and white supremacy. And so, as a result of that, I look at each one of those pieces, how they connect to the overall problem in society, even now, today, but how it connected back then. And so, talk about lies. Some people call it mythology. Well, some mythology is often just outright fabrication. Uh, and so I normally look at what's been fabricated that people hold dear or may hold dear without even realizing that it's not even true. I usually, even when I teach class, I usually start off, have you ever heard of the Battle of Thermopylae and the 300? Well, that's not totally true either. So I mentioned to them, what about the 6,000 barbarians that died there with them? And no one knows that. They only know the Spartan story, which is told only from the Spartan point of view, and all the other views are washed away or put aside. And that's very similar to the situation at the Alamo, where they talk about the battle. There's a real stretch of the truth of how long the battle actually lasted. And of course, this was mythologized in film, the famous John Wayne film that is just really almost like a cartoon.
1960, yeah.
Yeah, it's cartoonish, to say the least. But and then you had the one made after that that wasn't much better. But so these things I like to expose, including the Alamo, including the battle itself, including what happened after the Battle of San Jacinto Peace, and to look at slavery as how it relates to the people who died there. Every one of the Alamo defenders, even if there was only one slave, every one of them owned a slave. And you can make the argument, and I like to debunk the arguments. One argument that people always come up with is, well, everybody believed in slavery back then. No, they didn't. By the millions, they didn't, but they didn't have control of the power structure. People that control the power structure were obviously the wealthy. The wealthy are the ones who own slaves. Slaves costing as much as $300 to $400 each. After getting off of the slave ship, of course, the price goes up depending on what skill the slave may have. But we're talking, I don't know, if it's 300 or 400 slaves in a ship, that in today's dollars, that's probably $125,000. So at 400 bucks. So, or 300 bucks, I should say. So, so these are things that I was very much concerned with. What Travis, the three major components or fighters at the Alamo, what was he about? Well, he was a lawyer. He had no military experience, by the way. He was a lawyer, prone to bloated talking, bloated speech. As a matter of fact, Crockett couldn't stand him for that bloated speech. There was no really command and control there. There are probably about 9, I don't know, some historians say 9, probably around 12 Alamo defenders who deserted before any of the fighting ever started. And they tried to make a deal, and they wound up telling Santa Anna's troops, it wasn't Santa Anna, they couldn't talk with him, but they talked to one of his generals. They wound up making a deal with him about, we'll tell you where Travis and them are hiding the guns inside the city limit, and they did. And then you had Crockett, who didn't like Bowie or Travis either. As a matter of fact, several people, including Bowie and Travis actually called for the removal of Bowie from the fort. He sent telegram or message, I should say, could you please remove this drunken slob out of here? He won't obey orders. He keeps breaking men who have been locked up in the stockade who won't obey orders. He's just, I want him out of here. And of course, there was no chance to get that done because the fighting started. It was too late to remove Bowie from the Alamo. Bowie actually tried to sue for surrender. He tried to surrender the whole fort. And of course, Travis didn't want that. Travis was a lawyer, and he defended slave owners out of Louisiana to file lawsuits against the Mexican government, because once you crossed the Rio Grande, if you were black, you were free. No slavery in Mexico as a result of the 1829 decree by the Afro-Mexican president, Vicente Guerrero. That, I make the argument, was the centerpiece, and other historians have said that too. It wasn't just my idea, but it's well researched. When Vicente Guerrero outlawed slavery, that sent the shockwaves to the Alamo settlers, to the defenders, and I'll say the new Alamo defenders, or colonists because they totally were at odds with the older set of colonists. The older set of colonists didn't want war with Mexico. The new guys, the fire eaters, because they wanted war with whoever they needed, whoever they desired to have a fight with. So there's a big difference there as well. How many slaves did Bowie own? Quite a few. He brought 8 to 12 of them here to San Antonio when he came here. He married into a slave owner family, the Canary Islanders, slave owner families. Some people call them Tejanos. And I don't like calling them that, frankly, because they believed in slavery. Juan Seguin, pro-slavery man. Antonio Navarro, pro-slavery man. I believe he was a Corsican. I don't even think he was Spanish. So I don't know how you want to call him a Tejano because he lives here. I mean, that's like calling the Scotch Irish because they invaded Ireland. I mean, it's the same thing, yeah.
Right.
Well, the marauders get to claim some historical place name when in fact they are not indigenous to the area at all.
Well, I think it's very interesting too because when they depict in the mythology like who's fighting who, they talk about all these people calling them Texians. Very few of them were Texians. You had immigrants that had shown up to. There were people from Ireland. I said there were people from Scotland. There was somebody from Germany. They'd only joined, 2 weeks ago. There's very few real, Texians in that.
Well, and just that made me think of something else. The word Texas is actually a corruption twice. In the Spanish, it's Tejas, but before the Spanish, to the Caddo Indians, it was Tejas. So the corruption happened twice. That's like somebody calling a taco a taco, coming from New York, or an inshallah coming from somewhere else.
I shouldn't say this on camera, but my wife is British, and one of the days she said, "I made a wonderful dish for you, John." And I said, "Oh, it's this Mexican dish," and she said, "I made it with tomatoes." And I said, "Tomatoes? What is that?" "Oh, tomatillos?" And I never let her free. I said, if I go home and I said, "Oh yeah, I talked about you on the video about tomatoes," or you watch somebody from England, "I've not spent them taco,"
Well, it's the same as people going to Japan and getting off the plane and saying, where can we find the bomb site where they bombed Hiroshima? when it's, I get it, Hiroshima.
Right.
So people slaughter other folks' language, sometimes on purpose. Sometimes it's just by ignorance.
Yeah. I have a question, and these things are just coming into my head. I think a lot of times, and I said this earlier, I'm 64, I'll be 65 in 2 months or something, but I used to dress up in a coonskin hat. My brother and I used to play with guns when nobody cared. I mean, toy guns, and playing in the backyard. And I was always attracted to the frontier and resiliency, and people that would give their lives for a greater cause. I'd also point out, my students, unless they're in Greek history, don't know about Thermopylae. He said, "You guys know any?" 0. I said, "How about this? 300." Everybody knows what I'm talking about, but I have to tell them 300 and not what really. But the question I have is that a lot of times mythologies seem relatively innocent. It's a bit of a mythology, but I want to talk about the adverse effects of people holding on to these things, that the continued racism, other implications that are bad to hold on to.
Yeah, well, the Alamo, I think, is a good example of that. Moses Austin, who brought the first colonists in, he brought 400 black slaves with him. You had, as I mentioned before, Travis, a slave owner, protector of the institution of slavery by legal maneuvering. Bowie, slave owner. So this idea, what people I think don't understand is white supremacy is a disease, it's a poison. It never goes away. Some people would say it's not going to go away this side of eternity. A very famous speech by David Walker in his appeal to the colored citizens about the foundations of America. America was founded on white supremacy from the very first presidents, slave owners. And then you had some presidents like John Adams, those who didn't own slaves. So you can't say everybody believed in slavery. No, they didn't. But people rely upon that as some sort of way to not have to face the facts, and the psychiatric term cognitive dissonance, where you feel safer with the myth than you do with reality, and so you accept these myths because they boil out some sense of pride, when actually, when you look at the primary documentation, it really didn't happen that way. So they get some sense of pride, but it is based on white supremacy. It's always been that way in this country. This is a white supremacist country.
Right.
It's gotten better, but it's
Yeah.
still a problem.
When I was talking today with Jerry Pollo, and this thing was explaining to my students, and I just kind of asked them, in the book, the very small book, they called them greasers, and that had
De Leon,
yeah, that had quite an impact on me. And I said, I want to ask you guys, this is a common word that Anglos are talking to the people in Mexico. It's common. You know, it's anecdotal. I couldn't give you the numbers, but but I've read all the letters and the history books, and there's 1820s and 1830s, and I said, you guys know what the word is? It's a mongrel. All right. I said, if you Google mongrel right now, you're going to get all kinds of dogs. But collectively, the mongrel, and I talked about the mixed blood. You can go at the time of the Spanish Inquisition. You can go to the Portuguese, where they wanted to access land, but they wanted to get slaves, but they needed a justification to start talking about pure blood and mix. And then the idea was, well, what are they talking about when you say a mongrel? It said, well, I don't know. You could be black, you could be Mexican, you could be Tejano, you could be indigenous. Or like a mutt, like you could be all of them, and we don't know what you are. But the commonality of that word, it isn't like a one-off word. These are all mongrels that are over there. They all have mixed blood.
Right.
And then I told my students, you have to be very careful nowadays. And I mean this, but we were talking about color, and I remember that. And I said, imagine my wife says to me, John, how was your day? How was your day teaching today? And I said, oh my God. There was a lady that was copper skinned, or somebody was mocha, or somebody was jet black, or one of them was a swarthy cinnamon. This is my wife. Oh my God, I've never seen somebody. And then I said, is there an obsession? Is there a fascination with color? And what I mean is, and I'll be honest, I knew what jet black meant. I didn't know where it came from until I looked it up.
Right.
So I had to find out when somebody says something is jet black and all this. And there's this whole fascination, like, you know, with all these different colors and all this mixed blood. And I also gave, and this is somewhat contested, but the fandango has an evolution, meaning you might be talking about a Spanish fandango or a Mexican fandango. And in that book, they called
or
them
a Moorish one for that matter.
exactly, and you know, they called them greasers. This guy goes into, I think it's like a cantina, and he knows the lady is going to dance the fandango, but he's there to rail against her loose morals, her gyrations of her body, the way she's. I mean, he's there to write the diary and say, look
Right.
at this, you know, the morally depraved people, and I don't think I'm wrong here. When he starts to write in his diary, he's falling for her. He starts to talk about her perfect red lips. He talks about her ivory skin, the way. So the guy that came in to castigate her is now, I think, falling. He's got, you know, whatever. But the reason I bring that up is having no knowledge of what it's all about. I live in Claremont, where the 7 colleges are. Harvey Mudd and all that. And I talked to a scholar whose expertise is the fandango, and she said, oh my Lord, that's not what the fandango is about at all. And I also said, I said this earlier, but I think it kind of gels. I say to my students, if you say that Mexicans are lazy, as was said, or that they are mongrels, or you know, whatever it is, what are you saying? And they don't get the question. I mean, I do that on purpose. What are you saying when someone's lazy? And they're looking at me, the person's lazy? I said, yeah. But what you're also saying is you're not, because you wouldn't point that out, right? If we're all lazy, let's just say we're all lazy. What I'm saying, you know, and this is said in the book, the Mexicans work for 3 hours a day, and they get enough money for food, and then they can't wait for the nighttime to do all the things. And I'm thinking, boy, would I love to work 3 hours a day and have enough food and go. And I said, I think they got it right. But it's like that Puritan work ethic. You should be working 12 or 14 hours. These Mexicans will never conquer the continent. They're too lazy, and they have no morals and all those other things that come filtered.
Well, you know, there's no group of people more lazy than plantation slave owners, sitting on the porch, having their sweet chicken dinners, their julep mint tea, while having a slave fan them. I can't think of a group of people more lazy than that.
Yeah.
So That's an
Yeah.
interesting term, how these terms are attached to the very,
Yeah.
by the very people who are the laziest of all.
Yeah.
So this is a great point. But you know, people don't know the history of white supremacy. They don't know how all that started. People weren't even using the word race before the Enlightenment. And that created, I mean, you can actually look at the people who invented the word Caucasian. I teach that to my students. I said, well, anybody here still checking the box that says Caucasian? And a few of them answered, yeah. I said, you know, who invented that term? Did it exist before that? You know, and they find out a guy named Blumenbach, an Enlightenment thinker. He invented a bunch of different racial terms that had no existence before he invented them. So there's no, and what's kind of ironic about that is people live in the Caucasus Mountains are actually slightly darker, very slight, than ethnic Russians. So to call yourself
From the
a Caucasian,
Caucasus, yeah.
you're a little bit darker than the other so-called white people. So how did white people come to be? How did black people? Well, there were no black people in Africa. This is another myth we need to destroy. One guy told me one day, well, blacks sold blacks into slavery. Yeah, not exactly true. They weren't calling themselves black before the slave owners called themselves black. Ashanti were fighting, Bolam and Vai, the tribes were fighting each other, not on the basis of they were black, but on the basis this was a different tribe. Like the Angles and the Saxons fought
And
each
the
other.
Jutes
They weren't calling themselves white either. So the term white is invented, the term black invented by slave owners. No black person called themselves black in those days. They were by tribal name. So, so did blacks enslave blacks? Yeah, that's debatable, because they didn't call themselves black. And so I have students sometimes from Nigeria, and I get a kick out of them. I said, did your parents ever call yourself black before they came here? The answer is absolutely not. We're Ibu or Fulani or Yoruba. We never called ourselves black until we got to this crazy place. Then we became black all of a sudden. And so this concept of racial identification, it goes back to antiquity, but it's more like proto-racism. Whereas it becomes scientific is during the Enlightenment, and then it starts to take shape during the slave trade by the Portuguese and the Spaniards, who then began to attach characteristics to skin color. And let me tell you that, unfortunately, people in religious circles in Spain used what I call a visual vetting system. If you wanted to be a priest in the Catholic Church, you had to be visually vetted and documented as well. The visual vetting would usually start at the top of the head. I mean, a literal, I call it a racist stare. The literal stare. There's a few curls up there. What the, You're now suspect to be mixed with the blood of the Moors or the blood or Jewish blood, one or the other.
Right.
And then they would go down looking for a wide nose or chestnut-colored skin or whatever. So when you look at the original people who came from the Canary Islands, you have to look at the ship manifest. The manifest tells you how many blacks came, the term I'm using now, how many blacks came on the original, with the original Canary Islanders. It was about 36 families out of the 54 families that came. And guess the term that it makes it very easy to identify who they're talking about. They used an archaic spelling of the word blubber. They said this gentleman has blobber lips. The archaic pronunciation and spelling of the word blubber. Meaning he had full lips, which means he's African. And so you could tell on that Canary Islander list who was black that came here in the very beginning and who was Spaniard, et cetera, by using their own classification system. And of course, skin color, of course, the casta system under the Spaniards had all kinds of, I actually found my fourth great-grandfather that way. He's listed, had two birth certificate books in Spanish called the Libros de Casta, and in English, in Spanish also, Spanish, Libros de Españoles or Españoles, one or the other. So one book, because the Spaniards mistakenly called themselves white, one book is the Book of the Whites, the other book is the Book of the Mixed People, the mulattoes, the Indians, quote unquote Indians. And so you had this racial vetting system already in place that will progress forward for hundreds of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you familiar with Martha Menchaca?
Somewhat.
Yeah. I did an interview with her, and I got the time right, and she didn't. And I pulled up with the video, and she's looking at it. We have a 4 o'clock appointment, and I said, no, it's 9 o'clock. And she said, come on in the house. And, she set out all the stuff. But I learned a great deal from her on the Spanish caste system, and really, really excellent work. And I think what I'm doing is relying on different scholars. They bring this to the table. Someone brings the Tejanos. I knew what I wanted, what you kind of brought to the table. The thing we were laughing at is I think everybody plays the game. And when I say that, I remember Canary Islanders that had already mixed with other individuals, right? There was mixed marriages and stuff like that. But that could give you upward social mobility. You say, oh, I'm a Canary Islander. I'm from the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah, there you go.
I just married so-and-so.
Yeah.
I find this funny, but when I married my wife,
Don't get in trouble now.
no, she'll hear about this anyway. She knows. She's probably listening live now.
Okay.
But when we went there, I got married at Oxford. I went to Exeter College, Oxford, and we got married inside the church. And then the marriage certificate's about this long. I had to pay 50 pounds, so it said Mr. Haas. My wife was labeled as a spinster, right? She's a spinster, and this is 1998. Spinster. And I said, listen, I made you legit. I said, we got married and now you're Mrs. Haas, right? but it literally, and I show people this, it lists her, it's like her occupation is spinster.
Yeah.
And I'm a, Mr. Haas and like that. And of course we
You're a
get married.
John Doe, I guess, in that case. Yeah.
Well,
What's your password on this thing again? I gotta do some transfers.
for which?
For your laptop. You said POPPY 1959?
Yeah, my dog is Poppy. Poppy with a big P and 1959 with an exclamation.
Is it double P? POPPY?
Yes. Poppy, just like that.
After 1959.
Yeah.
I'm not getting it.
It's my dog. The two things are important, my dog and my wife, and the dog come first.
I hope that ain't on tape.
She knows.
There'll be a longer divorce paper.
Jim got me into trouble the other night where I'd never been to the Riverwalk last time I was here. I was
The first line of segregation,
This
the
camera one has
Riverwalk.
20 minutes left.
Oh my God.
That's the first line of segregation.
It
If
is?
you're white, you had to live on the western side of the river. If you're black or Indian, you had to live on the eastern side of the river. And that's how San Antonio's east side became the traditional black community. The river was these little creeks and rivers were the dividing lines. Not like other cities where the street was one side black, one side white. Here was the creeks and rivers. San Pedro Creek was the other dividing line.
Well, while we're on it, maybe we can come back to it. I think that there is this distinction I was learning about is like Valero and San Antonio, where things were divided on different parts, depending where they were talking in a panel discussion about the people that were more military, and maybe they're talking about Indios Barbaros compared to how out was divided. So on both sides, they were trying to talk about that kind of division, which I don't really know very much about that, but learning.
Well, even the talking about the Canary Islands and then that thing, the Canary Islanders was originally inhabited by Berbers, Moors, Africans. Basically, in today's terms, it was a black island.
Right.
It was conquered by the Spanish in 3 different wars. And it's even hilarious when I see some historical piece on the whistling language of the Canary Islanders. That's actually a Moorish.
Right.
The Moors had that. They claim it and completely erase the Arab contribution to that.
Am I correct in this? As I didn't know that with the AL in front of the name was Allah, or you knew it was the Moorish influence, Al-Mansur, or something with the AL that starts it. Is it?
AL, algebra, always developed in the Middle East. AL in front of any name indicates the name Allah. So you have algebra, Alvarez. By the way, Alvarez has a double whammy, I'll call it. AL in the beginning, EZ at the end. EZ is the more morphologically speaking, that's the Spanish or Arab, the Arab spelling for that name. So EZ, Rodriguez, Gonzalez, EZ at the end. I can find your Arab ancestor if your last name starts with EZ, or maybe even find it if it ends with ES, because sometimes they try to erase their Arab ancestry so nobody would know it. So you have all these words that are actually Arabic. Alamo is Arabic.
Yeah.
You have all these words that are Arabic, that most people have no idea that there's an Arabic origin. Medina is not Hispanic; it's Arabic.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, while we're on the subject, nobody talk. I mean, we talk all day about the Alamo, but nobody talks about Medina except the people that are in the know. You know, it's like, hey, can you please talk about Medina? Why is Medina skipped over? And you know, we don't hear that
So,
kind of
the
part.
holy city of Medina is in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Mecca and Medina.
Yeah, and Medina went to Spain. It wasn't the other way around.
Yeah. Well, I think that Medina was called Yathrib, and you know, the city of the prophet.
Right,
So
right.
Muhammad making his way up there. But yeah, it's these little things that I find it interesting because I always wondered about that, like Flores, and then I see it with ES on there, Lopez, where somebody
Yes,
says,
instead
you
of
know,
easy. It could have been changed on purpose, like
Yeah.
like the British did to the Irish. Your name is O'Connor. Well, you found out right away. Don't call yourself O'Connor. The British are going to start calling you the N word of Europe. So what you need to do is change it so it's more British. So O'Connor becomes Connor. They literally had to change their. Coming through Ellis Island, they would literally change their name to sound more British than Irish,
Yeah.
to erase their Irish ancestry because of the
Yeah.
hatred against the Irish.
Yeah. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to switch cards.
All right. Yeah. Well, I kind of promised I wouldn't keep you a long time, but I said if you can throw some venom into the discussion right before we go would be good.
Well, here-
No, I'm joking, but
No,
I've
I'm,
tried to
I'm
capture.
taking you seriously.
No, the passion that's in your audio book, man, I was like, oh my God, look at, you know, yeah. So I think what I'm thinking of is about my students more so than me. What I mean is, you know, the lessons that you know, that they hope they learn. And I think when you're a historian or, you know, scholar like we are, you have to be very conscientious in the things that you're doing.
Sure.
When I talk about white supremacy, I don't take this lightly. If I talk about settler colonialism, I don't take that lightly. I had, just as an example, I had two great Israeli journalists that I invited to speak to my students. And I wanted to illustrate again, the Gideon Levy, the great writer for Haaretz, and had him. It took me a little while to get him, and then he spoke to my students. And it's kind of in a way you relinquish. I'm not saying this. This gentleman is saying this, and we got to be based. The first thing I said, and then he said, was I want to be focused on October 7th. Let's not forget October 7th, because you're having a legitimate discussion. Doesn't say we're not. Let's look at what happened. Young people and old people in the kibbutzim were killed. It was a horrific act. However, if we go through that, and my friend Gideon Levy, he lost some friends in that.
Sure.
Then we need to turn to 1948.
Yeah.
You know, that's great. If you want to take one day, then you got to look at it. But my point in this is when you're doing something, there's no topic I ever cover that's more problematic than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I just do this really quick because I'm on a roll. But when I interviewed Chomsky, I decided I wanted to look at my video with Chomsky. It was about 5. Jim was with me. And it still went well. And and we were interviewing, and then when all this came on, I thought, I haven't looked at the Chomsky video in a long time. I'll just have a look at it. And you know, so I looked at it and I sent it to the whole school. No arguments, not a point, whatever. I said, I just happened to go back and look at Chomsky, and it seemed, God, the same lessons are kind of there. And then I sent it to a friend of mine. I sent it to the school, and then I got this response that was an individual response. Like I sent it to the school,
Right.
And then it said, "Does Israel not have the right to defend itself?" And my colleague said to me, "John, don't answer. You're going to be arguing every single day."
Yeah.
And I said, "Of course, Israel has a right to defend themselves. So do Palestinians, and you know, everywhere else." But my idea is that what is the narrative? What is the narrative you're trying to get across? And so for me, not speaking as the professor in California, but to have these people from Israel, they're Israeli Jews that have their opinion, and they're sharing their opinion with people. And just like in the history, the things that you leave out are often more important than the things that you leave in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in terms of the Alamo, one of the things that's a shocker to most people is most of the Alamo defenders ran. They didn't fight. They ran. About 120 of them ran out of the southern eastern walls. Most of the runners were killed by, interestingly, by black Mexican lancers called Los Morenos Libres de Veracruz. That's a shocker for some people. The 60 stayed inside the fight. There was night. There was no lights. There was no sun, nothing. It was the middle of, it was pitch dark. And only about 60, roughly, approximations, 60 stayed to fight. They killed all that 60 in about 15, 20 minutes. That's how long the Battle of Alamo lasted. It took longer to catch the runners, about 120 of them, and they were speared right where River Center Mall is. Roughly, I've measured it out, about 400 yards from the Alamo because they ran in that direction. And some people, another shocker for some folks, is Susanna Dickinson, who survived the Alamo. She often was quoted as saying, you know, Crockett kept running around the compound saying things, I'd rather die outside of these walls than to be hemmed up in here. Where his body was found was near the back entrance where a lot of them ran out of the backside of the Alamo. So he may have been trying to ferry them out, and he wasn't going to run with them. You know, he didn't feel like that. I'm sure he didn't feel like that would be a good thing to do. So that's where they found his body. And he found them around heaps of Mexicans. Those bodies were there. He didn't kill all those people. Dr. Philip Tucker, a military historian, he did a good job, I think, of looking at the Mexican documents, which I followed up on. Only about 300 Mexican troops were killed. That's it. That's all. Total number. And roughly half of that number killed by friendly fire. So 150 Mexicans died by Alamo fire. Another 150 shot in the dark by their own men, because it's just wild melee of people shooting everywhere. That comes as a shock to a lot of people, especially when I tell them about the quote from Crockett about, I need to get out of here. It's basically what he was saying.
Yeah.
And I think he tried to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I was talking, I don't know if this is a silly analogy, but it's like, you know, your parents tell you there's no Santa and you really like the dream. I mean, it's been a great sleep and a great dream, and it was like, oh, it's fun. It's not like I go around like saying, let's puncture, you know, the ideas of you know, this idea of frontier I like. And, oh my God, we knew we were going to die, and you know, we stayed there. The idea of the Thermopylae and 300. I mean, there's something as far as mythology goes. I like started to study mythology. You know, what should you put in the mythology? And the mythology is very black and white. We were talking a little bit earlier. The Tejanos, and I know you said you didn't like the word, but are not like a monolith.
No.
Like, you know, you had Tejanos that said, I'm willing to give more power to Santa Ana. You had other ones said, no, we're the Federalistas, we don't want it. And then we have some older ones that just wanted to be left alone.
Exactly.
You know, politically, economically. I want to be left alone. I mean, it's a bit scary. I used to be a bartender. My dream.
You can't be left alone like that.
Yeah. My dream now is an old guy is having a beer and an Irish whiskey and tucked in by about 9 o'clock. You know, it's like, oh yeah. When I was a bartender, when I was young, you know, we get out at 2:30 and everybody would go out, all the boys and girls, for breakfast. We'd have breakfast at 4 o'clock.
Until the sun comes up.
Yeah, but we know the historian and others like the quiet life. That kind of idea. We don't want to get in the scuffle here. We're not interested. We're not joining this group. We're living out our lives the way that we want to. And the point that's made is that's muddy. It's not clean. And that's what we do for a living. Yeah. That you have to say, I know what this kind of story is, but what I'm getting at here, you got to wade through that. Like you're trying to get to the truth. I mean, you know, I'm not telling you something you don't know. If I come back and show that video, someone's gonna, well, it showed like a real, you know, lover of you're crazy. Yeah. That's not you know, all that. Yeah. And then you get the group of people my last guest said, this guy's spot on, right? Mm-hmm. I said, I got you coming. He said, you know, and he knew you. He knew you straight away when you walked in.
And in my book, I talk about when you look at an elephant, if you're only looking at the skin with a microscope, you don't know the rest of the picture. If you're looking at all the picture and not the skin, well, you don't know the details. So one thing you learn as a professor is you learn how to zoom in and zoom out. You know, I used to be a guy that could zoom out much better than zoom in. after many years, I started learning how to literally to do this all the time. you know.
Okay.
So zoom in, zoom out. Um, and a lot of people prefer just riding through McDonald's and getting a burger real quick and leave without the details of who made it, where'd the meat come from. They don't even want to
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah, I don't think I want to know that either.
Yeah. And that has to do with education, the
Yeah.
complexity of education.
Yeah.
Some people want to know those complexities, those details, and some people are just satisfied. Herodotus once said, it's easier to fool a multitude than to fool one man.
Yep.
And I think that's true. Now,
Yeah,
we live
yeah.
on Planet of the Apes, and this is, I'm not trying to disparage apes, but we do live on Planet of the Apes now without those apes.
Yeah.
If you catch my drift.
Yeah, I think I do. I promised you I wouldn't be so long. The sun's beating down on your face. If you could give me, when I talk to, I want to say that I met you. What, the last 5 minutes of what are you saying in your book about the Alamo? I mean,
Well-
what's the upshot?
Well, this is what it looks like.
Yeah, I have it.
This is what it looks like. Got a crack right down the middle. And that idea is to present the idea that the mythology of the Alamo, the battle and so forth, it has a crack in it. And that crack is primary source documentation, which totally disputes what the going legend says.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the whole idea of the book, to look at the details as opposed to just looking at the mythology, look at the details, and then make some assessment of what you have discovered in the details. And for some people it'll be easy to do. For other people it'll be an eureka moment. And for other people, like you mentioned before, it'll be absolute denial. You know, I'll get crank phone calls, I'll get all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But it's par for the course, so I don't mind.
Right. Well, let me ask this. I'll try to put all the things together. Am I on solid ground talking about white supremacy at the Alamo?
Yeah.
Am I on solid ground talking about settler colonialism and the idea that, you know, the Alamo leads to the Mexican-American War and to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and it's, you know, consistent there.
Yeah.
And also that we talked about, like, I asked my students what's missing from it, and you don't hear the institution of slavery, and you don't hear, you know, white people talking about freedom and liberty, and freedom and liberty for who?
Yeah.
You know, and it you know, and that's what I ask is that, you know, the idea I'm hesitant, you know, I'm careful. Say this is white supremacy, this is settler colonialism. What's left out of the story?
After the Battle of San Jacinto, one just simply needs to read the Texas Constitution, where slavery becomes
Article 9?
enshrined in the Constitution. People who were freed by Mexico are ordered to leave the state, and the ones who escaped to Mexico, they try to pressure the Mexican government to return in the slaves back to the slave owners. That's pure proof of white supremacy is totally involved, from the highest levels all the way down to just the ordinary man. The other thing that shows white supremacy is involved, they recently erected a couple of statues at the Alamo. One by a guy named Hendrik Arnold. He was supposedly a black man that fought for the Texas independence. He was a mulatto who owned slaves. And people need to do the research on mulattoes in the United States that own slaves. You can easily find that with a little bit of research on the 1830 census. A lot of them escaped the revolution in Haiti. And these were mulattoes who fought with the French. Because of their lighter skin, they identified with white supremacy because they could own slavery. So they go to Louisiana, they go to North Carolina, South Carolina, and they bring those ideas with them. Hendrik Arnold owned slaves, and he sold his own daughter into slavery. That's why he's lionized by his fellow slave-owning buddies.
Yeah.
Hendrik Arnold. Then there's the myth of the Yellow Rose of Texas, total fabrication. Emily West was her real name, not Emily Morgan. She was never a slave. She was a free black woman who took a job on at the Morgan Hotel at Colonel Morgan's place, a slave owner. And I'm quite sure, and this is my own extrapolation, I think he attached the name Morgan to her last name because he didn't want to be ridiculed by fellow slave owners. Why are you letting a free black woman work at your hotel? Well, she's my slave, her last name's Morgan like mine. So he's the one, in my opinion, I extrapolated that. That's why her name is Emily Morgan. Her real name was Emily West.
Yeah.
These are all things that took place. And what did they say about her? She had sex with Santa Anna. Wow, that's a double whammy. That's
Yeah.
saying that black women
Yeah.
are promiscuous.
Yeah.
And there's an example of it. And Santa Anna, boy, he's a lustful Mexican.
Right.
And so this the whole idea works. And the song itself has nothing to do with, they changed the lyrics, by the way. The Yellow Rose of Texas was a slave song sung in the fields of Alabama and Louisiana. And it was a black people singing, a black man singing it, who fell in love with a mulatto woman, a black woman. And she was the Yellow Rose of Texas. It's a slave song. So they changed the words. The original words was Yellow Rose of Texas. I don't remember exactly the words, but they used the word darky. That's another term they used to describe black people, darkies. The word darky was in the original lyrics sung by the New Christy Minstrels. That was in the original lyrics. So this white supremacy is all over the place. That's everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, even looking at cracks in the wall. I mean, when I was a kid, look at the crack in the wall. We had a wood house. You could see the outside, the little tiny cracks in the wall. What do we call those little cracks? Chinks. Picture that, chinks in the wall. This is a racially loaded word.
My nana, as we called her, very prim and proper in New York, go to church every Sunday. She was a God-fearing lady. And I remember I was about 12 or 13, and she said, "Oh, look at all the pickaninnies, out there." And I truly believe in her mind, she didn't realize what she knew what the word meant. I don't think she understood. And I remember going with my other grandmother, what was it, sugar babies? We used to get the little like sugar.
Yeah.
But she used the N-word babies.
Oh, God.
And I was like 12, and we walk in there and said, do you guys carry the? And I was like, Grandma, what the, what? But she called them N babies because of the color. That's what they were, they were called.
Well, white supremacy is a poison. It's been with us for 400 years, and it hasn't gone completely away.
Yeah.
We see it in The Lion King, where the mean lion has black mane, and the only lion that does in the film. And then the hyenas are talking in some kind of jive language, reminiscent of black ghetto talk.
Yeah.
The hyenas are the bad guys, the guy with the black mane. King Kong, the most racist movie there ever was. A giant gorilla that falls in love with a beautiful white woman. And he doesn't like any of the black women that live there, only this white woman. So Gone with the Wind, oh God, that's the most racist movie they ever made.
Yeah.
Super racist.
Well, I was telling Jim about, and I said David Wark Griffith, when he wrote
The Klan, yeah.
well, I was talking about the Alamo, that it was started because somebody of color had raped a white woman. That was the trigger that took place in 1915 when that movie came out.
By the way, with that movie, the John Wayne movie, it premiered here in San Antonio in a sundown town. We used to have a subdivision called Los Angeles Heights. Blacks could not drive through Los Angeles Heights. It was a racist municipality in the area. It's now been absorbed by the city of San Antonio.
Right.
You can still see the
Did you call it Los Angeles?
Los Angeles Heights.
Los Angeles Heights, yeah.
City, the city of Los Angeles Heights.
Yeah.
The premiere of the Alamo premiered in a sundown town.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
I know this was last minute and you pick up the phone, but I think you're going to make my students very, very happy. And